A couple observations. First of all, when we talk about small businesses, and this is such a different environment here, because that is our first concern here, is where does a small business factor in the auction? It seems to me, despite your testimony, that it really isn't about owning spectrum for small businesses, that somehow the benefits of this auction and the conditions that have been attached on an open platform will somehow benefit small businesses by having handset manufacturers. I really don't know of a small business handset manufacturer, to be honest with you, or application providers, software providers, and also that certain areas small businesses will have access to the internet, and I think there's some legitimacy to that. But I really don't see the spectrum rules benefiting small businesses as far as ownership. And we're going to have a panel of witnesses a little later that may or disagree or agree with me. Secondly, I do believe that maximizing the monies that will be derived from the auction is of primary concern to the FCC, because we've told you, members of Congress, when we're debating the Deficit Reduction Act, we're replacing $10 billion, and that's on the low end of what you're going to get. Your reserve price probably adds up to about $10 billion. So I think the public owns the airwaves, you're the auctioneer, and you have a fiduciary duty, in my opinion, to maximize the monies that will be realized from that sale. I'm going to be citing testimony from some of the witnesses in addressing different aspects of the auction and the concerns that are expressed by some of these witnesses. First of all, that there would be the conditions: no leasing, reselling, wholesaling to other entities. And I will then refer to the testimony of Shelley Spencer at page 2. Another key to our success in acquiring the spectrum in the former or in previous auctions, which were recently rescinded, by the way, it permitted us to lease half of our spectrum to Sprint and Nextel. This is spectrum which we are not using in our own network, and for small businesses, the ability to lease a portion of the spectrum can provide immediate revenue, and as for us, provide the collateral necessary to raise the capital to purchase spectrum and build our own network. So I do want you to be able to address that. The second area, that larger companies will be attracted to the smaller licenses that they don't see as being encumbered by the open platform conditions that you have placed on the Block C. And so I'll go to page 4 of Christopher Gutman McCabe's testimony, and because I think he frames it really well. Incumbents that choose to participate in this auction and want a nationwide or regional presence will be left with a choice between bidding on a few large licenses with new and very specific service obligations, or bidding on the many licenses, as many as 734 in some spectrum blocks, needed to achieve the same area of coverage. While this is an unfortunate choice for all carriers, it may have the greatest impact on small businesses. As a result of the new license conditions, if large incumbents choose to aggregate many of the smaller, less encumbered licenses, small businesses will be hard-pressed to raise the amount of capital needed to compete head-to-head in an auction with larger established carriers, particularly in the tighter credit markets that exist today. Next, we'll go into open platforms will open markets for small handset manufacturers, small software companies, and small added value resellers. And I'll go to page 3, if I can find it quickly, of Mr. Edward Kelly Bond, President of Public Communications Incorporated, who in essence, unfortunately, the FCC's current plan for auction and licensing the 700 megahertz bands presents only limited opportunities for small businesses to participate. Small businesses have virtually no opportunity to participate in the provision of the anticipated high-speed service to be offered on the upper 700 megahertz C-block spectrum. Small businesses have no opportunity to acquire the huge C-block licenses in the auction, and the FCC's construction requirements do not encourage the large C-block licensees to work with small businesses. Since the open platform requirements apply only to the C-block licenses, the open platform requirements may be of little benefit to small carriers. Lastly, on the Regulatory Flexibility Act, page 5 of Mr. Bond's testimony
Mr.
reads.
Gonzalez, time is expired, so I'm going to give you 30 seconds. But I will allow for the chairman to answer
Well,
your
the
question.
last thing, and I think this is dear to the chairman's heart here, and I mean Chairwoman Velasquez, and this is what Mr. Bond states. There is a law that exists which I know this committee is all too familiar with. It is called the Regulatory Flexibility Act. As a regulatory agency, the FCC under this act is charged with giving particular consideration to whether or not its rules will negatively impact small carriers and particularly rural telephone companies. We cannot honestly think of one instance in which the Commission ever outlined in a final order that it had found circumstances that warranted adopting different rules for small rural carriers. And I know that is multifaceted, and I'll ask if Chairman Martin is not able to respond now, if he would in writing.
Well, I'd be happy to end up responding both in writing and now. Although, Chairman, if you want to go to the next questions, that's okay. No, I'm just kidding. Let me respond and say a couple of things. First, I think that there are often conflicting and competing interests that are involved in the Commission's rules that we're trying to balance when we're trying to come up with our auction. There's no question about we want to try to develop opportunities for small businesses to participate. But you also indicated that you think it's important for us to maximize revenue. Those two are competing and conflicting interests that do not always coincide. Actually, to maximize revenue, we should provide less opportunities for small providers to participate because they, in general, pay less for smaller pieces of spectrum than if we sold on a larger amount. So that's one example of how the competing and conflicting interests have to be balanced to come up with something that's fair to all the different parties. Another example is that you indicated that you were concerned about our limitations on wholesaling. Actually, we allow for a designated entity to wholesale up to 50% of the capacity that they've bought. What we don't do is what some who wanted to change our designated entities require. They wanted us to require wholesaling for pieces of this spectrum. And what we determined was that requiring wholesaling would have too much of an adverse impact on the amount of money people would pay for that spectrum, because incumbents would not want to participate if we required wholesaling. But they're allowed to wholesale up to 50% of what they buy. But they're not required to wholesale it. And many of the small businesses, or some of them who had argued for us requiring wholesaling, understood that if we had a wholesale requirement, it would actually deter many of the larger providers from even playing, which would actually drive down the revenue that we would gain. So I think that I think those are just two examples of how the interest that the Commission has and the interest that I think everyone has are often competing and conflicting, and we have to try to find a balance. But I think in our 700 megahertz order, we have tried to provide a balance that allows them, for example, to wholesale a significant amount of what they buy, but they're not required to wholesale at all. That we sell off a large portion of the spectrum in a large geographic area that has some open platform requirements, which we think will facilitate some small businesses, and at the same time sell a significant amount of the spectrum, with more than half of the spectrum is sold in small and medium-sized geographic areas without any encumbrances whatsoever. And I think that without any encumbrances on open access at all. And I think that's an example of how we tried to find an appropriate balance and give small businesses an opportunity.
Any answer on the regulatory flexibility analysis? Because that was my next question, so we can take this opportunity for you to answer.
I mean, I think the Commission is both statutorily required to and does undergo a regulatory flexibility analysis in all of our orders to determine the impact of our decisions on small businesses. And we do end up taking all of that into account. I'm not aware off the top of my head of any court challenge that has said that we have insufficiently done that regulatory flexibility analysis in recent times, but I'll go back and try to get you any further answers. But the Commission's always open if there's ways that the committee thinks we might be able to improve that flexibility analysis. We'd be happy to work on that.
So you're aware that you conducted a...
Oh, absolutely.
And so I will ask that you submit to this committee the economic analysis that you conducted on the impact that it will have on small business.
Sure. I mean, we always end up having to, and we're happy to submit the regulatory flexibility analysis that we have.
Thank you.